As I stood in the doorway, the world around me faded into a blur. The laughter that echoed from the living room felt like a cruel mockery of my reality. My heart raced as I pieced together the fragments of a conversation I had overheard. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted, was entangled in a web of deceit with a man who trained horses for a living. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, leaving me gasping for breath as I struggled to comprehend the magnitude of her infidelity. The scene was set in our cozy home, a place filled with memories of laughter, shared dreams, and promises made. The walls, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, closing in on me as I stood frozen, processing the truth that shattered my world. I could hear her voice, light and airy, mingling with another's, his voice deep and confident. It was a voice that should have been a stranger to me but was now hauntingly familiar, as if I had known all along that something was amiss. My mind raced back to the last few months. The late nights at the stables, the secretive phone calls, the way she would smile when she thought of him. It all made sense now, every little detail aligning like pieces of a grotesque puzzle. The anger began to bubble within me, a tempest threatening to consume everything in its path. How could she do this to me? How could she betray the vows we had taken? The questions swirled in my mind like a storm, each one more painful than the last. I was a fool to have trusted her. The love we had built over the years felt like a fragile facade, crumbling at my feet. I thought about the life we had shared, the plans we had made, and the dreams we had yet to fulfill. Now all of that felt tainted, overshadowed by her betrayal. I clenched my fists, feeling the anger morphing into a cold, calculating resolve. I would not let this man get away with his betrayal. I would ensure that he never won another race again. The horse trainer, with his charming smile and confident demeanor, had wormed his way into my life, and now he was stealing my wife. My mind conjured images of him in the stables, brushing down the horses, his hands expertly guiding them as if they were extensions of himself. I could picture him laughing with her, whispering sweet nothings, while I was left in the shadows, oblivious to the reality of our crumbling marriage. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and I needed to plan my next steps meticulously. The racing community was small and I had connections. I had spent years building relationships in this world, attending events and mingling with the elite of horse racing. It was time to use those connections to my advantage. As I plotted my revenge, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I would gather information about the trainer, about his history, his relationships, and any skeletons he might be hiding. I would dig deep into his past, unearthing anything that could tarnish his reputation. I would not let my emotions cloud my judgment. This was a calculated operation. I had to be smart about it, to ensure that my actions would have the desired impact without drawing attention back to me. The thought of the trainer's career spiraling downwards brought a twisted sense of satisfaction. He had taken something precious from me, and I would take everything from him. I envisioned the look on his face when the racing committees received the dirt I would leak, his confidence shattered, his victories stripped away, and his name dragged through the mud. With each passing moment, my resolve hardened. I would become a ghost in the shadows, invisible to the naked eye as I executed my plan. The thrill of the impending revenge coursed through my veins, mingling with the pain of betrayal. It was a dangerous cocktail, but I was willing to drink it down, knowing that the bitter taste would be worth the satisfaction that awaited me. As I turned away from the doorway, I felt a surge of determination. I was no longer the betrayed husband. I was a man on a mission. The stakes were high, but I was ready to play the game. The horse trainer would rue the day he crossed paths with me, and I would make sure he never won another race again. The initial shock of discovering my wife's infidelity was only the beginning. As the days passed, the emotional turmoil settled in like a dense fog, shrouding my thoughts and clouding my judgment. I found myself oscillating between anger and despair, each emotion washing over me like a wave, leaving me gasping for air. My once vibrant life felt muted, the colors fading into shades of gray as I processed the reality of my shattered marriage. I spent countless hours reflecting on our relationship. I remembered the first time I laid eyes on her, the way her laughter filled the air, making even the darkest days feel brighter. We had built a life together, one filled with love, trust, and shared dreams. I thought I knew her, but now I was left questioning everything. How could she betray me like this? Was our love a mere illusion, a facade that she had maintained while pursuing her desires elsewhere? The whispers of doubt crept into my mind, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I recalled the moments where I had sensed something was off, the late nights, the secretive texts, her distracted demeanor when I tried to engage her in conversation. I had brushed them aside, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. Now I saw those moments for what they were, red flags waving brightly in my face, warning signs I had foolishly ignored. Every memory of our time together felt tainted by her betrayal. I could almost hear her voice, sweet and melodic as she spoke of our future, all the while sharing her body and soul with another man. The anger within me simmered, threatening to boil over, but I forced myself to channel that rage into something productive. I needed to focus on my plan, to gather information about the man who had so callously invaded my life. The horse trainer was a piece of work, a man who thrived in the spotlight of the racing world. I had seen him at events, his confident stride and charming smile winning over everyone around him. He had a way of making people feel special, a skill that undoubtedly helped him in his profession. But beneath that polished exterior lay a man who had crossed a line he should never have approached. He was not just a rival, he was the embodiment of my rage, the focal point of my revenge. I began to dig into his background, utilizing my connections in the racing community to gather intel. I reached out to old friends, acquaintances, and even competitors, seeking any information that could help me dismantle his reputation. It was a delicate dance, one that required subtlety and cunning. I couldn't afford to be reckless. I had to be smart about this. As I gathered information, I learned about his rise in the racing world. He had been a rising star, winning races and gaining acclaim. But with every victory came the whispers of discontent, rumors of unethical practices, questionable training methods, and even allegations of doping. It was a goldmine of information, and I knew I could use it to my advantage. I spent hours compiling evidence, meticulously documenting everything I could find. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction as I unearthed each piece of dirt, envisioning how it would impact his career. I was building a case against him, one that would ensure he faced the consequences of his actions. The thrill of the hunt fueled my determination, pushing me further down this dark path. But amidst the planning, a nagging voice in the back of my mind reminded me of the moral implications of my actions. Was I truly justified in seeking revenge? Would this bring me the closure I desperately needed, or would it only serve to deepen the wound? I wrestled with these questions, feeling the weight of my decisions pressing down on me. I thought of my wife, the woman I had loved unconditionally. Did she deserve my wrath, or was she just as much a victim of her own desires? The internal conflict raged on, but each time I thought of her with him, the anger surged anew, drowning out any sense of doubt. As I plotted my next steps, I made a vow to myself. I would not let this man get away with his betrayal. He had taken something precious from me, and I would ensure he paid the price. The thrill of my impending revenge was intoxicating, and I could feel the darkness of my plan wrapping around me like a warm blanket, providing solace in a world that had turned upside down. With each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I was on a mission, and nothing would stand in my way. I would dismantle the horse trainer's career piece by piece, ensuring he never won another race again. The thrill of the chase was exhilarating, and I was ready to plunge headfirst into the depths of revenge. The horse trainer, whom I would come to loathe with every fiber of my being, was named Jake Reynolds. He was a man who had carved out a niche for himself in the competitive world of horse racing, and he did it with a combination of charm and ruthlessness. He had a reputation for being a hard worker, known for his keen eye for talent among horses and his ability to get the best out of them. But as I dug deeper, it became clear that his methods often skirted the edges of legality, a fact that I would exploit to my advantage. Jake was in his late 30s, with a rugged handsomeness that drew people in. He had a way of commanding attention when he entered a room, his confidence radiating like a beacon. I had seen him at various racing events, mingling effortlessly with the elite, his laughter ringing out like music. He had a magnetic personality, and I could see how my wife had been captivated by him. It made my blood boil to think of the moments they had shared, the secrets exchanged under the guise of training horses. I learned that he had been a jockey before transitioning to training, a move that had propelled him into the spotlight. His horses were known for their speed and agility, often dominating the tracks, but whispers of his questionable practices followed him like a shadow. I discovered that he had faced scrutiny from racing committees before, but he always managed to sidestep serious consequences, either through charm or by playing the victim. It infuriated me to realize how he had manipulated the system, much like he had manipulated my wife. As I gathered more information, I found out that Jake had a history of using performance-enhancing drugs on his horses, a practice that was not only unethical but also dangerous. I had stumbled upon a network of disgruntled former employees and competitors who were all too willing to share their experiences with me. They spoke of the pressure he placed on his horses and the lengths he would go to in order to win. It was a goldmine of information, and I began to formulate a plan to expose him. I reached out to a few contacts within the racing community, discreetly probing for any additional dirt on Jake. I had to tread carefully. I didn't want to raise suspicion or alert him to my intentions. I learned about a recent incident where one of his top horses had collapsed on the track, a tragedy that had been quickly swept under the rug. The whispers suggested that the horse had been pushed too hard, a victim of Jake's relentless ambition. It was the perfect angle to exploit, and I knew I could use it to my advantage. With each new piece of information, my resolve hardened. I was no longer just a betrayed husband. I was a man on a mission, determined to bring down the man who had stolen my wife and tarnished the integrity of the sport I had come to love. I envisioned how Jake's face would look when he realized the walls were closing in around him, how the confidence would drain from him as he faced the consequences of his actions. But as I plotted my revenge, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. Was I becoming the villain in this story? Would my actions truly bring me the closure I sought, or would they only deepen the wounds of betrayal? I pushed those thoughts aside, reminding myself of the pain that fueled my actions. I had to be strong to see this through to the end. I began drafting anonymous letters to the racing committees, detailing Jake's unethical practices and the incidents I had uncovered. I made sure to include specific names, dates, and events, painting a damning picture of his career. The thrill of the impending fallout sent shivers down my spine. I imagined the racing committees poring over my letters, their expressions turning from curiosity to horror as they uncovered the truth about Jake Reynolds. Every night, I spent hours refining my letters, ensuring they were concise yet impactful. I included enough evidence to make them take notice but left out any trace of my identity. I was a ghost, lurking in the shadows, ready to strike when the time was right. The thought of Jake's career crumbling under the weight of my revelations filled me with a sense of power I had never known before. As I prepared to send the letters, I felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I knew that once I took this step, there would be no turning back. The path I had chosen was dark and unforgiving, but it was a path I had to walk. I was ready to unleash my revenge, to ensure that the man who had betrayed me would never win another race again. With each letter sealed and ready to be sent, I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I was on the brink of something monumental, a chance to reclaim my dignity and restore a sense of justice in a world that had been turned upside down. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. The time for action was drawing near. With the letters finalized and sealed, I felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with dread. The moment of execution was upon me, and I knew I had to follow through with my plan. I had spent countless hours gathering information, meticulously crafting my letters, and now I was ready to unleash my revenge on Jake Reynolds. The thrill of anticipation bubbled within me, but so did a gnawing sense of apprehension. Would this truly bring me the satisfaction I craved, or would I find myself trapped in a web of consequences I couldn't control? I decided to send the letters anonymously to various racing committees, ensuring they would reach the right people. I chose a few key organizations: the National Thoroughbred Racing Association, the local racing commission, and a couple of prominent racing magazines. Each letter painted a vivid picture of Jake's unethical practices, detailing not only his use of performance-enhancing drugs, but also the recent incident where his horse had collapsed. I made sure to include witness accounts and any corroborating evidence I could gather, leaving no stone unturned. As I dropped the envelopes into the mailbox, a rush of exhilaration washed over me. I felt as if I were standing at the edge of a precipice, ready to leap into the unknown. The power of my actions surged through me, and for the first time since the betrayal, I felt a sense of control. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of my own revenge. The days that followed were a blur of anticipation. I watched the racing community closely, waiting for the fallout to begin. My heart raced every time I saw a news report or scrolled through social media, eager for any mention of Jake or the committees I had contacted. I found myself replaying the moments in my mind when I had first discovered my wife's infidelity, each painful memory fueling my resolve to see this through. Then, it happened. A few weeks after I sent the letters, news broke out about an investigation into Jake Reynolds and his training practices. The racing committees had taken my claims seriously, launching a thorough inquiry into his methods. Reports flooded in about his questionable use of medication on horses, and the racing community was abuzz with speculation. I reveled in the chaos, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction as I watched Jake's carefully crafted image begin to crumble. As the investigation deepened, I learned that several former employees had come forward, corroborating my claims. They spoke about the pressure Jake exerted on his horses, the lengths he went to in order to ensure victory. The racing community, once enamored with him, began to turn against him. I couldn't help but smile as I imagined the fear creeping into his heart, the realization that his empire was collapsing around him. But as the excitement of my revenge began to take hold, I also felt a pang of guilt. I had unleashed a storm that would not only affect Jake, but also his family, his employees, and the horses under his care. I had become the very thing I despised, a man consumed by vengeance, willing to destroy another's life for my own satisfaction. The weight of my actions pressed down on me, and I questioned whether this path would really bring me the closure I sought. Yet, every time I thought of my wife's betrayal, the anger surged back, drowning out any sense of remorse. I had to remind myself that Jake had brought this upon himself. He had crossed a line, one that should never have been crossed, and now he was facing the consequences. I steeled myself, resolving to see this through to the end. I had come too far to back down now. As the investigation gained traction, I watched as Jake's once thriving career began to unravel. Sponsorships were pulled, and he was barred from entering his horses in several upcoming races. The whispers of scandal followed him like a shadow, and I relished in the thought of his downfall. I imagined the conversations happening behind closed doors, the betrayal he would face from those who once supported him. But it didn't stop there. News outlets picked up the story, and soon Jake was the center of a media frenzy. The headlines screamed of his alleged wrongdoings, painting him as a villain in the eyes of the public. I felt a surge of satisfaction every time I saw his name splashed across a newspaper, each article reinforcing the narrative I had crafted. Yet, with every victory came a new wave of doubt. I couldn't ignore the fact that I had destroyed a man's life. The thrill of revenge was intoxicating, but it was also a double-edged sword. I had to confront the reality of my actions, the moral implications of what I had done. I had set a chain of events in motion that could not be undone, and I was left grappling with the fallout. As Jake's world continued to spiral out of control, I realized that my actions had consequences far beyond what I had anticipated. I was caught in a web of my own making, and I had to decide whether to continue down this dark path or to pull back before it consumed me entirely. As Jake Reynolds' world continued to unravel, I found myself in a precarious position, teetering on the edge of a moral abyss. Thrill of my revenge was intoxicating, but it came with a weight I hadn't fully anticipated. With each headline that splashed across the news, each whispered conversation about his downfall, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and an unsettling guilt creeping in. I had achieved what I set out to do, yet the victory felt hollow. The racing community, once filled with admiration for Jake, now turned its back on him. I watched as he became a pariah, his name synonymous with scandal and deceit. The sponsors who had once lined up to support him pulled their funding, and his stables, once bustling with life and energy, fell into disarray. I reveled in the chaos for a while, but soon I began to question the cost of my actions. I couldn't shake the image of my wife from my mind. She had been a part of this world too, and the thought of her witnessing Jake's downfall filled me with dread. I had sought revenge for her betrayal, but at what cost? Would she see me as a hero, or would she view me as a monster? The realization that my actions could have devastating consequences for her struck me like a cold wave. One evening, as I sat alone in our living room, the silence enveloped me. I had spent so much time focusing on Jake that I had neglected to consider how this would affect my relationship with my wife. I could only imagine the conversations they had shared, the secrets exchanged, and the dreams they had built together. What would she think of me now? I had become the very embodiment of the vengeance I had sought, and I was left feeling as empty as the space around me. In the days that followed, I found myself increasingly isolated. Friends and acquaintances began to distance themselves, sensing the darkness that clung to me. I had become a man consumed by revenge, and the weight of that obsession was suffocating. I felt like a ghost in my own life, wandering through the motions but never truly present. The thrill of my plan had transformed into a burden, and I was left grappling with the consequences of my choices. As Jake's career continued to spiral, I received news that he had been summoned to appear before the racing committees. The investigation had gained momentum, and he was facing serious repercussions for his actions. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and dread. On one hand, I had succeeded in my quest for revenge. On the other, I was about to witness the complete destruction of a man. The day of the hearing arrived, and I found myself glued to the television, watching the proceedings unfold. Jake sat at the front, his once confident demeanor now replaced with an air of defeat. The committee members grilled him about the allegations, and I felt a surge of adrenaline as I watched him squirm under the pressure. He was being exposed for the fraud he was, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. But as the hearing progressed, I began to feel a twinge of sympathy for him. He was a man on the brink of losing everything: his career, his reputation, and perhaps even his family. I thought of my wife again, and how she must be feeling as she watched the man she had betrayed face the consequences of his actions. In that moment, I realized that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The hearing concluded with the committee announcing a temporary suspension of Jake's license, pending further investigation. The media frenzy surrounding the event only added fuel to the fire, and soon after, Jake became a household name for all the wrong reasons. I felt a pang of guilt as I watched the news anchors dissect his life, his failures, and his fall from grace. I had orchestrated this, and now I was left to reckon with the reality of my actions. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself haunted by the ghosts of my decisions. I had sought revenge, but I had also stripped away the dignity of a man who, despite his faults, had once been respected in his field. I began to question my motives. Had I truly acted out of a desire for justice, or had I simply been driven by my own hurt and anger? The guilt weighed heavily on me, and I realized that I needed to confront my wife. I had been so consumed by my mission that I had neglected to consider her feelings, her perspective on the situation. I needed to know how she felt about Jake's downfall, and whether she still harbored any feelings for him. The thought terrified me, but I knew it was a conversation I had to have. I approached her one evening, my heart racing as I prepared to lay bare my emotions. As I sat down across from her, I could see the worry etched on her face. We had been distant since my discovery of her infidelity, and the weight of unspoken words hung heavily in the air. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. She nodded, her eyes searching mine for answers. I took a deep breath, ready to confront the truth. "I've been watching everything happen with Jake, and I need to know how you feel about it. I need to understand what this all means for us." Her expression softened and she began to speak. "I never wanted it to come to this. I made a terrible mistake and I'm sorry for the pain I caused you, but seeing him fall, it's heartbreaking. He's not the man I thought he was, and the truth is, I never loved him. I loved the idea of him, the excitement he brought into my life, but I realize now how foolish I was." As she spoke, I felt a weight lift slightly. It was clear that she was grappling with her own regrets, and for the first time since this all began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps there was a way forward for us, a chance to rebuild what had been lost. But I also knew that I had to come to terms with my own actions, the darkness I had embraced in my quest for revenge. "I've done things I'm not proud of," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was doing the right thing, but I've lost sight of who I am in the process." He reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "We both made mistakes, but we can't let them define us. We have to confront this together." In that moment, I realized that revenge had consumed me, but it didn't have to define my future. It was time to let go of the anger, to find a way to heal, not just for myself, but for us. The road ahead would be difficult, but as I looked into her eyes, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Perhaps, just perhaps, we could find our way back to each other. As I sat across from my wife, holding her hand and feeling the warmth of her touch, I realized just how fragile our love had become. The path we had walked together was littered with betrayals, misunderstandings, and pain, but perhaps it was not too late to rebuild. The journey ahead would not be easy, but the first step was acknowledging the hurt we had caused each other. "I've been so consumed by my anger and the need for revenge," I admitted, my voice trembling with emotion. It clouded my judgment, and I didn't stop to think about the consequences. I wanted to hurt Jake for what he did to us, but in doing so, I lost sight of what really matters us. She nodded, her expression a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I know, I made a choice that hurt you, and I can't take that back. But we can choose to move forward, to learn from this." Her voice trembled slightly, revealing the vulnerability beneath her calm facade. "I don't want to lose you, and I don't want to keep living in the shadows of our mistakes." The sincerity in her words struck me deeply. I had spent so much time focused on Jake's downfall that I had neglected the most important aspect of my life, my relationship with her. I had been blinded by revenge, but now I saw clearly. It was time to take a step back from the darkness and focus on healing. "Let's put the past behind us," I suggested, feeling a flicker of hope ignite within me. "We can't change what happened, but we can choose how we move forward. I want to rebuild our trust and create a future together." She squeezed my hand tightly, a glimmer of relief washing over her face. "I want that too. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I know I have to earn your trust again, and I'm willing to fight for it." As we sat there, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. The anger that had fueled my need for revenge began to dissolve, replaced by a desire for reconciliation. I had come to understand that while Jake's actions had hurt me deeply, allowing that hurt to fester only perpetuated the cycle of pain. It was time to break free from that cycle. In the days that followed, I made a conscious effort to focus on my marriage. We began to communicate openly, sharing our fears, regrets, and hopes for the future. We sought counseling, determined to work through the issues that had brought us to this point. It was a long and challenging process, but with each session, we began to peel back the layers of hurt and mistrust. Meanwhile, the investigation into Jake continued. I watched from a distance as he faced the consequences of his actions, but I found that my feelings toward him had shifted. I no longer felt the burning desire for revenge. Instead, I felt a sense of empathy for a man who had lost everything due to his own choices. I recognized that my quest for vengeance had not only affected him but had also robbed me of my own peace. Eventually, the racing committees announced their findings. Jake was suspended indefinitely, his reputation shattered. I could only imagine the turmoil he was experiencing, and while I knew he had brought this upon himself, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for him. The thrill of his downfall had faded, replaced by somber realization that revenge had not brought me the satisfaction I had hoped for. As my wife and I worked through our issues, we found a renewed sense of intimacy and trust. It wasn't easy, but we learned to lean on each other, to support one another as we navigated the aftermath of betrayal. We began to dream again, to talk about our future, and to redefine what our relationship meant to us. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I turned to her and smiled. I never thought we could come back from this, but here we are. I'm grateful for your willingness to fight for us. She smiled back, her eyes sparkling with hope. We've both made mistakes, but it's how we choose to move forward that matters. I believe we can create something beautiful from the ashes. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. I had learned the hard way that revenge was a double-edged sword, one that could cut deep and leave lasting scars. But I also understood that love, when nurtured and tended to, could heal even the deepest wounds. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close. We were not the same people we had been before the affair, but perhaps that was a good thing. We had faced the darkness together, and now we were ready to embrace the light. I had sought revenge, but what I found instead was the power of forgiveness and the strength of love. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but I was no longer afraid. Together, we could face anything. And as I looked into my wife's eyes, I knew that we would emerge stronger, ready to write the next chapter of our lives together.